Is your Wi-Fi in here? I can't pick it up.
Mhm.
Do you know the number?
Oh, they erased it.
Oh, they did.
It was normally up there. Where's our leader? So that means John's in charge?
That's what she said.
Excellent. Good choice.
You tell me when we're ready. All right, welcome to February 15th Planning Commission meeting in the city of Alpine. We welcome everyone who's come out to join us tonight. We'll begin by having roll call. We've got Troy Slade, Ethan Allen, John McKay, Susan Woodenberg, and Jeff Davis with us as commissioners. With that, we will have an opening prayer by Ethan Allen, and then Troy Slade will will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Our Father in heaven, we're thankful to meet tonight as a planning commission, and please help us to understand the needs of our community and the needs of our citizens, that we may be able to choose those things that will allow them to enjoy their community and to increase the satisfaction of our citizens. And we ask thee to help us to be able to complete our duties. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Is there anyone here wishing to make a public comment? If not, we'll move right into our agenda with a presentation by Jordan Cullimore of the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman on land use training.
Ready to go?
Yep.
Okay. So I feel like I can just plug in here and Austin can turn over to me. I can even see myself. Look at this. Perfect. Okay. Well, do I need to speak in the microphone for Zoom, I guess? Okay, so yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Jordan Cullimore. Here's my information. I'm the lead attorney in the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman, which my predecessor, Brent Bateman, if any of you heard a presentation from him, would always say he was pretty sure it was the longest title in the state of Utah. So we haven't figured out how to shorten it yet. But thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. I actually grew up in Linden, Utah. So I'm a Linden County-ite, Utah County-ite, right? It's always good to come back. I live in Riverton now, but I find it help. And for what it's worth, this is not the smallest group I presented to. I think last summer, Torrey, Utah, there were 3 people when I drove down, which in Torrey, yes, Torrey was.
That was like it.
And that's the cool thing actually about our job is we cover the whole state. We're a neutral, nonpartisan, state-funded agency that mediates property rights disputes. And we also provide a lot of training. So, you know, we travel all the way from Kanab to, Bear River and Bear Lake, I guess. And we provide trainings to local communities, understanding that each community is different and they are dealing with their own issues and have their own concerns and their own desires. And so as a result, we go around and try to provide individualized trainings and answer questions about what they want to talk about. So a little bit about our office. Again, I'm the lead attorney. We have 2 other attorneys in the office, Rick Plen and Marcy Jones. And then our assistant is Cindy Nelson. So we try to be very accessible as far as answering questions. And we do spend a lot of time doing that throughout the day. People call in whether they find us on their website or, they came to a training that we provided. And maybe they have questions about land use or eminent domain. Those are the two primary areas we deal with. When we're not on the phone, we're writing advisory opinions. So either a local government or a property owner, developer can come to our office, say, hey, there's a dispute over this subdivision application or a site plan or a conditional use permit. Can you tell us what a court would say about our dispute? And so we get, information from both sides, and then we try to provide a legal analysis that acts as a dispute resolution tool to hopefully help to resolve the dispute, so that the parties don't need to go to court, right? The other area we primarily work in is with eminent domain, and there, when the government needs someone's property for public use, they have to tell the property owner about our office, and we don't represent the property owner or the city or the state. We work with UDOT a lot too. But we act as a neutral third party. If the property owner doesn't like what the government is offering, then we can get an additional appraisal. And then we also act as mediator to try to help resolve the dispute in that way, if the parties are interested. So that's kind of the primary areas that we work in and deal with. And I put my information up here just to say, give me a call, or email me, check out our website. Part of the reason we're here is to help people know what the law says so that they can make better decisions. Any questions about that initially before we jump into the really fun stuff? Okay, so our typical presentation that we provide is more of a discussion. It's not so much a presentation, but a discussion and a conversation. And it really lasts as long as you want it to. So there are typically some major points and issues that we like to make sure we address, as far as, roles of the Planning Commission, the distinction between legislative and administrative decisions. Inevitably, those issues always come up when we're talking about these things. When I was communicating with Austin prior to coming here, he kind of gave me a few topics to go over, so I can talk about those as well. I think it was, we have slides on ADUs, short-term rentals, moderate income housing, and reasonable accommodations. But again, I'm here to kind of talk about what you guys want to talk about. So where do you want to go with it? I can kind of get things rolling and talk about the things that I prepared, or if you guys have questions right now, we can jump into those and get to the rest eventually. What do you prefer?
Seems reasonable.
Okay. Okay. Well, and maybe then let's start with kind of the roles of the Planning Commission and very closely associated with that, the difference between legislative and administrative decisions. Are we kind of new, experienced planning commissioners? What's the combination today?
We're mostly pretty new.
Mostly pretty new. So there's a spectrum over
Brand.
We've been here like a year,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
John's the only seasoned one.
How long have you been on the commission?
4.5 years.
4.5.
Yeah.
Who is it? There was some, I think in West Valley, they have a planning commissioner who's been on since like 1985 or something. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Something wrong.
Right.
Career.
So you got a little way to go before you hit the record, but
Not going there.
no thanks.
It's like 30 years, John.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's a long.
I'd like to live that long.
It's several years, and I just remember thinking, man, I was not very old when he started on the planning commission, so. Okay, so the roles of the planning commission. Technically speaking, you only have one statutory role, one role that the state requires. And that is to be essentially a technical advisory body to the city council when they're making land use ordinances. So when they're making the law. The idea is that every time they're going to make a new ordinance, so and that gets to the legislative administrative decision. So anytime they're making a legislative decision, they're making a new law, they're changing the law. And here's kind of a slide on that. So legislative decisions, we're talking about making laws of general applicability. And in making those laws, the city council is weighing broad, what does it say? They're based on the weighing of broad competing policy considerations. So they're asking the questions, what do we want our community to look like? Where do we want housing? What type of housing do we want and where do we want it? A little bit later, we'll talk about how the state's given us, started to more and more give guidance to local governments, right? About moderate income housing and affordable housing and those types of things. But in large measure, it's still up to you, the local community, to decide what you want in your communities. But there's a lot that goes into that. So there's preferences and there's opinions, but there's also the market and there is, availability of services. So there's kind of the policy side of things. What do we want? How do we want to look? But there's also the technical side, transportation corridors, provision of services, sewer, water, electricity, telecommunication. Where does it make sense to put things? And that is really where the Planning Commission should be focusing, is when a proposal comes in for enactment of a new zone or a zone change, something like that, you guys should be asking those technical questions, either of your staff or of the developer proposing that you change the zoning. If we increase densities here, do we have the services to provide that? If we don't have the services, what would it take to provide those services? What does transportation look like? Do we need traffic studies? Those types of things. So really, the Planning Commission, it's intended in the model that you guys are gathering those types of evidence so that you can make a recommendation to the city council. And then the city council, they take all that information, they consider it, and they also consider what the public has to say about their preferences and their opinions as well. And you can help gather that information for them as well. So in state law, the only public hearing that's required for a land use regulation for when you're making the law is with you guys, with the Planning Commission. City councils, most of them do still have public hearings, and most local codes still require that the city council hold a public hearing. But as far as state law is concerned, a meeting where the public is entitled to get up and speak to the item, that only happens with you guys. Question?
I don't know, that doesn't seem, so generally if we've had a meeting, they've had a meeting as well,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they always have to
And
have a
that's
meeting. Okay, so yeah.
They've
that's-
had a public comment period as
Okay,
well.
yeah. Yeah, so we when we talk about land use and open and public meetings with local governments, there's a public meeting and a public hearing. Public meetings are when the public gets to come and watch, and every public body has to do that, city council, planning commission. But not every public meeting is a public hearing, and a public hearing is where the citizens get to speak to the item.
Okay.
And so, yeah, the only time that happens, a public hearing by state law, is with the planning commission. But again, you still have to follow your local ordinances. And most local ordinances do also say that the city council needs to have public hearings for land use regulations when you're changing the law. So that's your primary role, is to be that technical advisory body to the city council and to try to gather that information when you're making legislative decisions. And when we talk about legislative decisions, we're talking about adoption and amendment of the general plan.
So we had a one come through that there was a development that was being changed, and we all voted, we all looked at it and it met the city plan.
Okay.
And so we said, yeah, that meets the city plan.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily like it or want it, but
Mhm.
we feel like this meets the city plan.
Okay.
So it came through here unanimously and then was defeated in city council.
It happens.
Is that typical or normal, or how should that be?
It happens for sure. And there's a Utah appellate court case where that exact same thing happened. It involved a Harmon's grocery store
Okay.
that backed up against some residences. And, the front of a Harmon's looks really nice. The back of the Harmon's,
Not so much, yeah.
but it was the same thing. There were long transportation corridors that made sense. It complied with everything the general plan said. And that's what happened. The city council made a recommendation. This fits as far as checking all the boxes and meeting all the requirements of, does it work here?
Yeah.
It does. And so they recommended approval. But at the meeting, guess who came to the meeting? It was the homeowners.
Right.
And they didn't want it there. But because Harmon's had to request a zone change, so they needed a legislative decision. The city council was allowed by law to consider, do we want this here? Do we want to change the zone? Right?
Right.
Because I think it was probably zoned for agricultural, residential, and they needed to change it to commercial. And so the city council listened to that information and they said, no, we don't want it here. And so it went to court, and the court said, zoning decisions are policy decisions. Courts don't get involved in policy decisions. And so the decision was upheld.
But at the planning commission level, we don't have that flexibility. We're just determining whether or not it's compliant with ordinances.
Well, okay, so that's definitely for sure with an administrative decision. So let's say Harmon's had come in and they had the zoning for a grocery store. At that point, now we're talking about an administrative decision. An administrative applies the law to the application and makes sure it complies. And at that stage, you're absolutely right. The question of, do we want this in our community? That's already been asked. And the local ordinance that the city enacted answered that question. Yes, in commercial zones, we want grocery stores. This is a commercial zone. We want this here. So the question moves from, do we want this here? What do we want our community to look like, to does it comply with the rules? But that's not the only role of the planning commission. And frankly, it's not an essential role. You guys don't even have to. So the land use authority, that's the entity that makes administrative decisions. And state law says that local governments can designate who they want their land use authority to be. It could be Austin, just Austin, right? It can be your DRC. It can, or we the engineer. Okay, yeah. So it could be a group of staff members, because again, it's largely looking at, what does the application say? Does it comply with all the requirements? But when you need a legislative decision before you can get to that question, so in other words, if the laws don't allow for the use that's being proposed, then the city has some broader discretion. And so again, but your job still, so the city council, their job is to decide so in considerations, right? The legislative body should attempt to strike, well, where's the one I'm looking for? So here, when they're listening to the public, right, they can take into consideration preferences and opinions. And then that last sentence in the first paragraph, it's up to the legislative body to determine how much weight to give to any preferences or opinions.
That's council in this case.
That's the council, right? And so your job, right, it's not, you don't want to duplicate exactly what the city council is doing. You want to, even at that stage, your job is primarily to give them a recommendation about whether or not, okay, city council, you go ahead and weigh, policy preferences and opinions. But as far as whether or not this works where it's being proposed, yes or no, that's your job, like we talked about with legislative decisions.
And I think we understand that.
Good.
It's just that some members of the planning commission caught grief for following that guidance.
And to that, we say thank you for your service. No, you're absolutely right. And it's not an easy job sometimes. And that's why, I mean, we wish that every citizen who came in and made comment could first sit in one of these kinds of trainings before they do, but they don't. And so, there's a lot of things you can do as planning commissions to hopefully try to soften. The biggest problems we see are when the public comes in, and again, this is no fault to the city, but the fireworks really start flying when the public comes in expecting one thing and something else happens. So they come in thinking, I get to tell this body what I think they should do, and they're going to listen to me. That may be the case in a legislative decision, but it may not, right? It's a representative form of government. So the representatives get to weigh those things and decide who they favor as far as preferences. But if we're in the administrative decisions, and unfortunately that's, the legislative has passed usually when people find out about a development project.
Right.
And it's an administrative decision. It's a subdivision plat. It's a conditional use permit. It's not so much variances, but those are administrative. Site plans, building permits. That's usually when people find out, is when someone comes in and makes that application. But at that point, we don't ask the question anymore, do we want this? We just ask, does it comply with the rules? And so at that point, if you guys are the land use authority making that administrative decision, because yes, you can be designated in code as a land use authority. And I'm assuming that the commission does make those kinds of decisions here. You make subdivision plat
Adjustments, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we just make the recommendation, motion from the commission to send to the city, say, we recommend that you.
Oh, so even administrative decisions, the city council is still
Yeah.
designated as a land use
Yes.
authority in a lot of cases.
Isn't that the case?
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Austin, there are certain
Yeah.
responsibilities that planning commission is actually the determining body.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
if
And
there's small amendments.
It's very, very limited,
Then
but
we-
I think one of them
okay.
is conditional use permits, for example, that you're actually you actually are the decision maker on
Okay.
on that.
Okay, because I guess I haven't been on one of those yet,
Yeah, and state law.
right?
Yeah.
Not-
One of those.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Well, something to look forward to. And state law gives the city, sorry, we're gonna say something else?
I was just gonna say that on subdivisions, so concept and preliminary are actually both approved at a planning commission level
Oh,
as well.
okay,
Yeah,
Yeah, and state law affords the city that discretion. It's the city council. They make the decision of who the land use authority is on any given administrative decision.
Okay.
And again, they can retain it, which honestly isn't that, it's not advised that they do that, because sometimes it's hard for the city council to take off their policymaker hat and put on their administrator hat. But they can. And then sometimes it's delegated to the planning commission, sometimes it's delegated to staff. And those are primarily the three entities that act as a land use authority to make administrative decisions.
So can I,
Yeah.
so how can it be beneficial for us to like hear public opinion? You know, like how can that benefit us?
Okay, great question. I have a slide about that. So here's what I think the role of the public is in administrative decisions. It's not to, well, you can give them their due process, right? And you can listen to their opinions and their preferences. And you can, in whatever recommendation you make, pass that along to the city council and say, hey, when we had a public meeting, here are the preferences and opinions that we received. It depends on how involved you want to make your recommendation, right? You could just say a yes or no, or you could add more in a staff report, right? If you wanted Austin to say, hey, here's what the planning commission wants me to share with you, the city council. So you can do that. You can gather that kind of information. I think, but you're talking on the administrative side, right?
Right.
For an
Yeah,
administrative
right.
decision. Okay. So with an administrative decision, I think the only benefit, well, not the only, the primary benefit for listening to the public, and this is why I say you need to be very clear with them going in. We're making an administrative decision. If you start telling us about what you want here and why you want it or why you don't want it, we can't consider that. And I've seen some cities put that on like the back of their agendas even, so that when someone comes in,
That would be.
so that they can hopefully read that before they get up to comment. But your planning commission chairperson, it's gonna go a long way for them to explain that, right? Say, hey, here's what we can consider and here's what we can't consider. And they can't consider opinions or preferences for an administrative decision. You just can't consider those things because that's passed. What you can consider is you can receive input from the public for the purpose of gathering facts and evidence to support your conclusions in your decisions. Hey, are you guys aware that there is a irrigation ditch over here? And maybe your local code says something about how irrigation ditches should be treated in a development proposal. And maybe you guys don't know about that, right? Residents typically know things about, maybe the condition of soils, not usually, but maybe they can bring that kind of information to the table, right? But admittedly, it's very limited. And the reality is that state law does not require you to receive public comment, to have a public hearing on administrative decisions, but you do have to follow your local codes. So whatever your local code says, that's what you have to do. But if you want, the city council can take out the need for a public hearing in administrative decisions for that reason. If you want to leave them in though, just make sure the public knows what their role is when they're making comment on those decisions. It's to provide evidence. And when we talk about evidence, we're talking about down here at the bottom, right? Evidence as a general matter is factual, it's credible, and it's relevant. So, credible, you can back it up. Relevant, it's to the point. And then factual is that it's not an opinion or a preference, frankly.
And if I can add one
Please.
thing, if you don't mind. In
More the
terms of when you are considering, for example, as Jordan articulated, when you do have a public hearing, it's going to be tied to amending an ordinance or something like that, legislative decision, right? Anytime you are considering amendments to an ordinance, that's a legislative decision on whether you should or should not include this language. And so you'll be hearing comments on that. And it is completely fine at that point because you're making a preliminary legislative decision, although you aren't the decision maker, right? You're making a recommendation. It's completely appropriate for you to consider the public input on a legislative decision, right? So you have people turn out. Sometimes, as Jordan said, the public hearing, that's their only opportunity to come out and express their opinion is to you. So you definitely can consider the public input on legislative decisions on should we make an amendment to this ordinance? How does that affect neighbors around it? Things like that. When we're talking in the administrative arena where it's just are we going to issue a permit or do they comply with the subdivision code? That's not really a time to receive public input, right? You're just going down a criteria and seeing, do they check the boxes?
Okay. Like, for example, tonight, if we get to the setback on all the additions of the accessory structures and swimming pool, all of that, that's all legislative.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, and I think if I looked at all the decisions tonight are legislative, right?
Yeah.
So with those, again, you're looking at a proposed ordinance and you're saying, is this how we want to regulate those things in our city? And your role is to take more of a technical approach to it. Does this comply with best practices? So, it's smart to look to your staff, right? Your planner, your attorney, your engineer, your public works director, and see what they think about it. Consider that, right? And then you can make a recommendation to the city council about whether or not you think this is a good idea. But if this were a building permit and someone was saying, okay, I want to build a house and here's the proposed setbacks, then you're just looking, okay, well, what does the ordinance say? And as long as it complies with what the ordinance says, you say approved. And if it doesn't comply, you can tell them, go change the setbacks, So
doesn't most of that just go right to Austin and Austin approves it or not? And we don't even see most of that?
Yes, that's correct. There's a lot of stuff that we've been making the shift in the past few years to try and do a lot of stuff administratively where it gets approved at a staff level.
Okay. That's
So
what I
there is
figured.
we try like all the simple no-brainer kind of stuff. We try and handle that at a staff level. So it doesn't have to come to a meeting and.
Okay. Okay. And does the person bringing that, does he or she have the option of saying, I don't like what you're saying, Austin, I want to go before the planning commission? Do they have that? Does the public have that right or
Well,
not?
there are some things in our ordinance, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but I know there are certain things that they can appeal. But I think it's usually to the city council. They don't agree.
Okay.
They would be kind of the appeal authority in that situation.
Okay.
But that's very limited in our ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah, and there are certain cases in which with administrative decisions, primarily with subdivisions and conditional use permits, where you have to gather some facts and then make a decision about whether or not to impose a condition or something. In those cases, you're still not asking, do we like this? But there are cases where you have standards in your ordinance that say, okay, for this type of use, a gas station in a neighborhood commercial or something, I don't even know if you have anything like that, but where you can say, hey, there are certain types of uses that fit in the zone, but they may have detrimental impacts on the surrounding uses. And so you have standards in your ordinance to say, these are some potential areas where there might be detrimental impacts: traffic, noise, lighting. Those are some of the big ones, right? And so if you identify certain uses that are proposed as conditional uses, again, they're still entitled to approval unless it's just totally incompatible, which is very rare. There's only been one case in Utah very recently where the denial of a conditional use permit was upheld. And it's even questionable whether or not, anyway, so so there's only been one case. But in most cases, if you can impose reasonable conditions to mitigate the detrimental impacts, not eliminate, you don't have to eliminate them, you just got to mitigate them. And if you can impose conditions, or the applicant can propose conditions to mitigate those impacts, then you can impose conditions, reasonable conditions, and then you approve it. So the quintessential, in my mind, conditional use is a church in a residential zone. People want churches in residential zones, but they also have certain characteristics that arguably might not be compatible in some cases with residential zones. There's a lot of people coming to one area, right? And so hopefully you just have requirements in your zoning ordinance about what the parking is for a church. But if you don't, and you have a standard that says, hey, if this use causes an undue traffic issue, then we can impose reasonable conditions. Then maybe you say, hey, you gather evidence, number one, and you say, what is your typical attendance going to be, or when do you typically operate? And then you can say, well, hey, as a condition, we need you to provide more parking, right? So in those cases where you have standards that you're applying for conditions, you need to have quote unquote substantial evidence to support your decision, which means some good evidence. So maybe that's a traffic study. Maybe that's a well thought out opinion from your engineer or something like that, right? So those are kind of the two standards when we're looking at when you're making administrative decisions. Is one, do they comply? And that's that plain language standard. You're looking at the language of the ordinance. And if it complies with what the code says, you're approving it. And then in cases where you have to make factual determinations or discretionary decisions, you're supporting those decisions with factual, credible, relevant evidence. Any questions about that? Drinking from the fire hose, right? Okay, so back to our board, right? We've kind of covered legislative and administrative decisions and the role of the planning commission. Do we want to talk about the other things that Austin kind of identified? Do you have any other specific questions right now? Where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, I mean, I have a question that maybe you could talk about, because we're gonna come up on that, if not tonight or soon, about property acquisition, like you can probably go
Eminent
all the way
domain.
to eminent domain.
Okay.
That's gonna be an issue. So knowing what our role as a planning commission on that is going to be, would be helpful.
Okay, yeah, so the planning commission, they don't have to be involved in decisions of whether or not to exercise eminent domain, but I guess the city council can get a recommendation, right? But typically the obligation of the city generally, and it kind of depends on who the city designates to take the lead here. Often it's staff, whether it's usually an engineer or an attorney, honestly, who are kind of taking the lead at the initial stages. So state law, what it says is that local government, if you need someone's private property for a public use, first and foremost, you have to make an effort, a sincere effort to attempt to negotiate with them as if it were an arm's length transaction. It's not, but you have to try to negotiate that way. And they have to give the property owner a offer, and they have to show how they came to that offer. Basically give them an appraisal and say, okay, we've done an appraisal. This is what we think your property is worth. Here's our offer. They also have to give them a pamphlet about our office. So that person can call up and say, okay, what are my rights here? What's my, a lot of people think they have to just accept the government's offer. And they don't. They can negotiate. And they can say, you know what, I don't think that's a reasonable offer. And if they don't think it's a reasonable offer, they can even request that we mediate the dispute. And we can require the parties to come to the table again if the property owner requests that. We can order an additional appraisal where the property owner chooses the appraiser and the city pays for it. I'm pointing at you guys, but city council, right? And then hopefully through that process, so the state has set up this scheme, right? So that to provide a forum where the parties can get some evidence and they can have a conversation, and understanding that it's not, you know, there's an element of compulsion there, but can we see if the parties can come together and work out an agreement that everyone can live with, right? And then only if, once they've done that, then the city council can authorize, and if they're not able to come to an agreement, then the city can authorize, the city council has to authorize whoever they designate to move forward with filing an eminent domain action, which is typically going to be your city attorney or an attorney you hire to do it, right? So that's the general process. And then through that, you know, you kind of go through the same process over again, but now the two parties are trying to convince the judge what just compensation should be, what the fair market value of the property being taken is going to be. So that's a general overview. Is that helpful or?
Yeah, so for Canyon Crest, our role mostly is going to be updating the transportation master plan, right? But also getting comments from the public about that change, right? Okay.
Yeah, and so yeah,
Well,
that's a good
some
point, right? Leading up to it, you'll make decisions about, you know, where you're going to put corridors, or you'll make recommendations to the city council about where corridors make the most sense. And that down the line could potentially impact people in that way. If you're, as a city, you're getting ahead of the development and you're trying, which, you know, arguably is good planning, you know, so.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it's, yeah, there's different ways you can do that for sure, so.
Yeah, I was just mostly interested in, for that particular case, what our role is. If it's just gonna mostly be listen to the public and then make recommendations to change in the transportation master plan to the city council.
Yeah, listen to the public. So if you're talking about your master transportation plan and your general plan, I would say, yeah, listen to the public and what they think. But also listen to your city engineer and your planner and your attorney about, you know, where does it make sense to put these services and what alignments are the best and those types of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Consider all of that for sure. Good questions. Okay, any other questions at this point? We can go back to, so here's the, should I touch real quick on those items that we had? Okay. So, all right, I have a few slides. So accessory dwelling units, in 2021, do you have your, by October 1st, you were supposed to have an ordinance in place that allows accessory dwellings in Alpine City in at least 75% of your residential zones, right? And so that's what House Bill 82 did. Affordable housing is a big issue right now, and housing affordability. And no one's figured out the silver bullet on how you solve the problem. If there was a state that had experienced this already and had figured it out, we could just go to them and say, what'd you do? And we could do it. But no one's figured it out. So now Utah is in this scenario where housing is becoming unaffordable at an increasing rate. And so the legislature said, hey, this is more of a regional issue. So it makes, statewide and regional issue as opposed to just a local issue. So they've stepped in and they've started to give some guidance. One of them we'll talk about in a minute with the general plan and your moderate income housing. Let's talk about that first, actually. So state law requires cities to plan for moderate income housing growth. You have to include an analysis in your general plan that provides a realistic opportunity for the development of moderate income housing within the next 5 years. And then each year you have to report on how your plan is going and potentially make adjustments if you need to. And so the state law has this menu of proposed strategies, implementation of ADUs, less restrictive zoning requirements, things to do with impact fees maybe, right? There's just this list and you have to adopt at least 3 of those, right, into your plan. And then you have to make reasonable efforts to pursue those goals. So the state said, hey, this is what you have to do, local governments. We're not going to tell you right now where you have to have moderate income housing or that you have to allow 2-family dwellings in single family zones, or those types of things, but they're saying you do need a plan for it. And then that's the penalty if you don't is that you might not qualify for certain transportation funds that the state has available for, and they prioritize. They have this transportation fund and they prioritize projects. And if your project is somewhere on the priority list and you're not doing this, no money, you don't get the money, right? So that's in a nutshell kind of what the state is currently requiring. And there's a new bill this year. I don't think it's actually been published yet, but word has it there might be some modifications and some tweaks, right? But that's the current requirement for what cities have to do as far as planning for certain types of housing that are hopefully going to be affordable. And then, so that was, I think, in 2019 when they started that effort. 2021 is when they passed House Bill 82 that said, okay, you got to allow accessory dwelling units in your cities. But there was a lot of negotiation with that bill, frankly, and there were a lot of exceptions. One of them being that you can say, okay, with a residential zone that covers 25% of the city, you can kind of designate and say, okay, these are the areas where we don't want. And we're talking about IADUs, internal accessory dwelling units. So the legislature has left it to cities to still decide where and if and how and whether they want detached accessory dwellings, garden houses or something like that. But if the person is staying within the footprint and they're meeting all the requirements and they bring in a building permit and say, I want an IADU, then it's an administrative decision. And you guys, if you say, yep, it's a permitted use, and you approve it, right? Yeah, and there's certain things you can't regulate, the internal size, that you can't say, hey, you have to have a certain total lot size, other than you can say that for lots under 6,000 square feet, you don't get IADUs. You can't say that you have to have a certain amount of frontage. So, if your lot doesn't have 200 feet of frontage, you're not eligible for an IADU. You can't say stuff like that. But you can say that they need an additional parking spot. And if they're converting a garage or something, you can tell them to replace those spots. And so if there's any questions like that, right, I'd just go through your ordinance should cover all that at this point. So you're just making sure that it complies. But that is something that the legislature has stepped in and said, okay, local governments, you don't have discretion here, right? You need to do this. So any questions there or comments, thoughts, other ideas?
Question for you. Do you see them going back to the detached thing? Do you think that, where do you see that going?
And permitting detached? I haven't heard any conversation about it, to be honest.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that we won't see it. It used to be that for a period of time, for probably the past 10, 15 years, there was a good thing going where legislators would bring their ideas to what was called the land use task force, which, there was the development community and there was local governments. And, our office, we've participated in this committee. And the legislators in the interim, we call it, right? When the legislature's not in session, they bring these ideas and they'd say, here's our idea. And then, you know, those stakeholders would kind of hash it out and say, this works, that doesn't work. And then they'd kind of come up with a consensus plan. And then that legislator would take it and they'd run it through the legislator. And it was something that had been vetted and questions had been considered about what concerns there would be. Because of, you know, growth and how big of an issue it is, more and more there's bills that are popping up during the session that no one knew were going to come down the pipeline, right? And so as far as that pipeline is concerned, I haven't heard that conversation of having, you know, including detached accessory dwellings. But admittedly, this bill, HB 82 in 2021, I don't think that one came through the land use task force. That one was a surprise to the development community. But when it did come, everyone kind of agreed that, yeah, this is important. So they tried to hash it out within the session and this is what they came up with. So anyway, good question. Okay, short-term rentals. Are you guys getting a lot of requests for short-term rentals?
Well, we've
For a minute?
We hit a squash.
Head on.
kind of squashed that.
Oh, okay.
So a couple years ago, we had a lot of these popping up everywhere. And so we brought it to the city council. They looked at it. They decided that the easiest thing would just be to not allow them in our city. So that's the direction we went.
Yeah, and the legislature hasn't stepped in with short-term rentals. So it really is up to the city to decide, the city council at the recommendation of you guys, if they want to allow them anywhere. The one recommendation I have, and it sounds like you haven't had a problem with it, but be specific. So, you know, there's a case out there where someone did a short-term rental in Sandy. This was years ago, before it was cool, right? Before VRBO and Airbnb and everything like that. They were part of this like local ski group where people could come from around and they could stay in this house, go skiing up the canyon and then leave. And in that case, the city said, you know what, you can't do a short-term rental because our ordinance says that you can't do anything that isn't in line with residential uses. And what the court said is, hey, your ordinance says you can do single family dwellings. And these people are using this as a single family dwelling. They're only using it as that for a day. But nowhere in your code does it talk about, you know, duration of the stay or whether or not it's a lease or ownership, those types of things. And so in that case, they said, yeah, if you just say single family dwellings are allowed and nothing else, property owners get to do what they want with their property in that context. So if you are going to restrict them, just make sure you're specific about what a short-term rental is and where they're allowed and what they're not. But that's kind of long of the short of it is, that's the long of the short of it. But yeah, the discretion is still left to each local government. The one thing that the legislature did step in recently and say is local governments, I guess what was happening was, you know, code enforcement officers were just going on to Airbnb and VRBO and they were finding listings. And then they were just sending out notices of violation to those individuals that had those listings. And the legislature said, you can't use just a listing as the basis for your enforcement. You have to actually, you know, have evidence that they did use it that way, essentially. So that's the one area where they've stepped in and said that. The exception is IADUs, internal accessory dwelling units. So you can say, we don't want, well, you can just use listings in that context. So if you find a listing for an IADU that you have on record at the city and someone's listing it that way, in those cases, you can go and say violation, right? And use that enforcement mechanism. So again, that was one of the compromises that was made with that IADU bill. But okay, any questions? We're coming up on the hour mark. Reasonable accommodations. So is there context with this one by chance, or sorry to keep pulling you in, Austin?
Yeah, so this is Craig actually wanted you to go over this.
Oh, okay. So what we're talking about here is group homes. And when we're talking about group homes, we're talking about addiction recovery facilities, facilities for other disabled individuals that live together. So those facilities fall under the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disability Act. So we're getting the federal government involved and their regulations. And essentially, okay, so federal law prohibits housing practices that discriminate based upon, among other things, disability. So, you know, someone recovering from an addiction is by federal law a disabled individual. That seems to be the most controversial one. Is usually drug or alcohol recovery programs, right? That brings the people out when those are proposed. And let me give some background. So when I started working in this industry 10-ish, 12 years ago, there was a provision in state law that kind of outlined, okay, local governments, this is how you consider group home applications. And it created problems because federal law it's complicated, frankly. You need to be, I don't know what I would need to know about it, frankly. And so you need someone who specializes in this kind of thing to make sure if there's going to be a dispute, essentially. And so they took that and said, you know what, this is leading communities down the wrong path and they're getting burned. They're losing in court and having to pay all sorts of money. And so they revised that to say, when you're considering a group home application, follow all applicable state and federal laws. And then they even just took that out. They're like, we're just not going to touch this eventually. And so because of that, what I say is, if you have a group home coming in that doesn't comply with your requirements and they're asking for accommodations, right? So local zoning may not make unavailable, so here's the legal standard. Local zoning may not make unavailable or deny housing because of a protected characteristic like disability. And essentially what that means is if the city treats a group home for a disabled individual differently than it treats other homes in the same zone, then you might be discriminating. So if you say, hey, you need extra parking, but for a home of that size and that, configuration that isn't a group home, you wouldn't require that, then you might be discriminating, frankly, right? Or if you say, hey, you need to have these additional, if you impose additional requirements on them that you're not imposing on just a normal house in that zone, you might be discriminating, okay?
But wouldn't it be a different use if you're talking about a zone that's single families and then this is not a single family?
So that's the whole point, right? Is apparently, as far as the federal government is concerned, this use is a residential use.
Okay.
And so they say you got to treat it like a residential use because there's studies that show that these individuals need that, as I understand it. Again, I'm not an expert here. I'll say that first and foremost. My understanding is there are studies that show that, hey, these individuals need having a residential environment to recover in is empirically beneficial, right? And so they say you gotta treat them the same.
Yeah.
City may also violate the law if it refuses to provide reasonable accommodation to land use ordinances when such accommodations may be necessary and this is the standard, to allow persons with disabilities to have an equal opportunity to use and enjoy the housing they'd like to use, essentially. So an example that I've seen is someone needs to install an ADA accessible sidewalk on the side of the house, but setbacks don't allow for it. In that case, they can come in and say, hey, in order for me to enjoy this kind of housing, I need to put in these features to allow me to access and use the home. If you say no to that, you might be violating federal law, right? Another one that I've seen typically is, hey, in order for this to work, we need at least, so maybe your ordinance says something like, you can have up to 8 individuals in a group home, but they say, in order to make this feasible, we need 12, then you need to consider that, and you might need to make an accommodation. Again, I'm not saying you do or don't, I'm just saying those things are things you want to consider. And so the takeaway is that the take-home message is consult someone who knows the rules, follow those rules, and be careful. if you're gonna say no to anything with a group home who's asking for reasonable accommodations, make sure you've consulted a professional and that you're comfortable in making the decision you're making is the best advice I can give there, so.
And just on that point, here in Alpine, the reasonable accommodation decisions are done by Shane. They won't be coming to the planning commission. We've helped him out on several, and he consults with us when we're considering those reasonable accommodations to make sure that we're following the Fair Housing Act. And there's an analogous Utah code provision that's also fair housing that you need to follow. Is basically verbatim. So, but we wanted you to have a presentation on this so that you understand when you see group homes here or there, or you see non-conforming homes or something that's violating a setback, that they might be reasonable accommodations that have been approved for a disability.
Or we might have people come to public comment portion and complain about a new home in their neighborhood or something. So just so you're aware.
Yeah, and so I worked as a planner in Linden City, and in the year and a half I worked there, we had 2 group homes come in. And it was a scenario where, you know, there were larger homes, and they were kind of these custom homes that weren't necessarily, you know, the seller wasn't able to find the right person on the market who liked the custom nature of it. But there was a group home in both cases that I understand, a company that said, hey, that would make a great recovery facility, you know, so. They definitely come up. Okay. Any other questions for me? That's all I have prepared. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah, thank
Appreciate
you.
your time and effort on this. This is
You
very
bet.
helpful for us. Okay, moving on through the agenda, we have a public hearing for the Trail Master Plan update of Lambert Park. Who wants to introduce that?
I'll go ahead and kind of just start this, and then we have Will with our trail committee here, and Jed can probably chime in on this as well. But what you're seeing on the screen here, this is kind of the proposal that we're looking at tonight. The main purpose behind what you're seeing here is to try and improve the trail system for the purpose of sustainability. So we have some issues with the trails, erosion, that kind of thing going on. And so the main reason I would say is probably let's build some trails that are more sustainable. And so what you're seeing here, we have two trails that are downhill, the blue and the green. We have those are downhill mountain bike only, I should say. The orange trail would be a multi-use trail. So it'd be uphill for mountain bikes. It could be hikers, you know, it'd be a shared trail. And then the white on the far left that you see there, that's a hiking only trail. So in order to do all this, you can kind of see on the map here, and let's see if this annotation is working tonight. Maybe not. Here we go. Okay, so you can kind of see like there's some existing there's some trails that run through here. So those would have to be reclaimed. That's kind of in a nutshell. I don't know if Will, you want to come up here and talk more to this, but this would change significantly. I would say it would make some big changes to the south end of Lambert Park.
And you were saying that the green is also downhill only, Will?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, your key is there on the right-hand side. Our goal here is we were asked to please try and get something up that would bring people to the top of Crossfire. Crossfire is where the shooting ground is and that kind of thing. And remember, we were going to do a big pavilion up there. And thank goodness we came to our senses before that happened, because all that was doing is providing a great place to sit in the shade while you shot across the hill. And in fact, we laugh about this one, but remember the story that Shane was telling us, that he went up there. Was it Shane or Jed? Were you there the day?
It was Shane.
Yeah, he went up there and we'd cleared the pad and they'd set up. They were up there all set up shooting off our pad because it was such a nice level spot for them to do. We were even gonna make it one step better. We were going to put
Covered.
benches and chairs and covered roof and, maybe get some water up there and, help them a lot, So it was defeating the opposite thing. What we came back to is we'll put a signage up there, but our goal is in trails, there's two big issues. And the first one is the most important, sustainability. We have a whole bunch of trails over here in the south end. You got every color dog that's possible as a name, and then several others. And that's okay if we had hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain, but we don't. We have volunteers. That's how we do it. Do it twice a year, spring and fall. We can't sustain things that don't flow right. And so we've hired this guy, expert, very, very, very good. From Park City, knows what he's doing. I mean, he spent a couple of days up there before he did anything. Went on every trail, rode them, walked them, came back and then called me again. We went back up and he says, here's what I'm concerned. This is the whole plan right here. I don't know that we can get this whole plan done. We've already, him and I have met a couple times and we've eliminated about $5,000 or $6,000 out of this already. We're hoping to get it down to about $65,000. Okay, so first thing is sustainability. The other thing is, what is the primary goal? Why do we have trails? Are we trying to reach just a certain group? Are we reaching high-end biking people? Are we trying to get more? And that's why, if you've been in Lambert in the last 6 months, you saw that we put in a great big walking trail. This is fairly flat, fairly level, goes around, and it's got, by the time we're finished completely, it'll be over 2 miles. And it's a great trail. I mean, the only problem we have, I know vehicles aren't allowed in Lambert, except for some reason on that trail they are. It's the darndest thing you've ever seen. They don't go anywhere else, except we've have them now encroaching on that trail and driving down. It's like they got a new road, but we'll figure that one out. That's for us to figure out. We haven't quite figured it out yet, but this trail is awesome. But we felt like also over here, if we don't at least get one trail up there that's walking, then, we haven't included that group of people that we're trying to get more use, from a bigger group of people. We don't want it to just be Lambert biking. We want it to be Lambert for everybody. So more people can get involved and more people can use it. And so that walking trail, as it finishes, right now it's awesome, but we'll finish it up here in a few months. Yes.
Well, is that up there is that coming off of High Bench? So
Yes.
around the creek, so it comes around,
Uh-huh.
it's wider. So are you gonna eliminate, the bikers will stay on High Bench and then the walkers, they won't?
They
mix
won't
anymore?
cross. There'll be two individual trails. So, and that's what we're trying to stop. One of the challenges that we had is too many people that walked it. We're not liking walking it anymore. And you know where we had them? We had them out on the gravel roads, which isn't really fun to walk on. I mean, you can do it once or twice, but it's boring. So we created this trail along the High Bench and it gets down by the streams. They get to enjoy the same things that the bikers were. And it's amazing. I had half a dozen, and I've talked about this in the city council. People complained to me when I was up there working with the guy. Darn right, say, this is the worst thing we've ever done. I can't believe you're doing this. You guys are idiots, And we agreed and moved on and kept building trail. Guess who in the next 2 weeks after that were the biggest users? One lady who was definitely slightly rude, came by a couple weeks later and says, okay, this is the most awesome thing that's happened up here. She runs up there every day. And she said, I can't believe I didn't see what you're trying to do. I was mad because she liked running High Bench. But High Bench has poor visibility in it. And now all of a sudden, she can see people all the way around and she's happy. She said, I hate it. I was always worried that, somebody would be around the next corner. Now I can see a long ways ahead. So anyway, it's working, it's trying to do. Hopefully when we get our 501(c)(3), it will be paid for by a donation from a citizen in town. He's offered $50,000 to pay for that because he wants to keep increasing Lambert Park's use. Awesome.
So where's your signage gonna come? Because that's the big thing. Like I said, bike and run up there. And so I see that problem. You've got people coming up on you so fast and everybody's wearing their earbuds now. And so when it's getting more dangerous. But I wonder the signage, because really the law really is that the hiker or the walker has the right.
Has the right.
And the
Number
right
one
way.
right is someone walking. So we started some up on the other end and then it froze up on us. And so we figured it wasn't gonna get too much use in the winter.
Yeah.
So in the next couple, we've got the signs all,
Okay.
we own them, we have them, we just gotta set them up. But I would thought it was better than it was, it's still frozen down about 6 inches up there. You don't think about that when you go out like a day to day and yesterday, man, it's gotta be beautiful. But no, underneath about 6 inches, it's all frozen. So we will get that, but that is a big deal. And then we'll re-mark this one here, because you don't want it downhill on that walking up or down. We
Just like
can't
every
mix
dog.
those. And I'll tell you, the white one is probably the one that we may not get done in this first round, okay, in our funding, because we've only got so much of that. That's one I really like, but we may not get it done. We hope.
So the only way to get up is to take Zag.
Zag. Yeah, Zag's gonna be our up,
Okay.
and we're gonna tweak it a bit. As you can see, it doesn't follow the exact Zag where it is. It's kind of hard for people to go downhill to go uphill. And Zag has a tendency to do that in about 4 different locations. You start heading down and you're going, and you know what's happened. You've probably seen it if you've been up here in this last few months. They don't go down. They make a shortcut to go through. So we're trying to keep people on trails, keep the trails going. That's what helps them maintain. And so we're tweaking that. So that's why this is on. Again, I appreciate this process because this is how it's supposed to happen. This is how we protect Lambert Park. If we come to you and you guys can have the hearing and do that and then recommend, we don't have to worry about Lambert Park. We're doing what we need to do. But here's my point. And I'll quit with this because I get really irritated by this. How do I say this kind? Okay, I got to rephrase where it's going. If we will follow our ordinance and not skip it or force it down on you, we will follow that ordinance that's there. We can do things in Lambert that we need to do. I didn't know. I've been here 50+ years. There was no trails like this. I rode my horse up there. I rode my motorcycle where people are, okay, when it came time for that not to be there, it went away. We could do it. We can add things. I don't know what the use will be 50 years from today for sure. I can't even tell you 10 years. The trails that we're doing now are so different than the trails that we built originally. I just hope that we'll be careful as we go forward and preserving that right to you guys. You are the ones that are here. You see it. You should be giving us the input. You should be the ones holding the public hearing and saying, okay, that meets with what we're trying to do as a citizenship, rather than getting that off to somebody else. Okay, that was my political statement of the day. I usually don't try
Couple
to
more
do that.
questions, Will. So Indian will go away, Corkscrew will go away.
Corkscrew on the far end. Now you remember Corkscrew goes off this map. It's beyond. So
Yeah.
we'll come up and it ties into the top of Crossfire.
Crossfire. Okay.
Corkscrew is Crossfire
Okay.
extension, but
Okay.
we're on private property there
Yeah,
by permission at this point,
sure.
but we don't know what that would do. So
The
that's
other
why we're-
question that I had was, and maybe this is more to Austin, is like up at the top there are roads. What's the purpose of like the road that goes
The
up
answer to
there?
that, we brought up because we were gonna kill some of the roads. We wanted to kill some of the roads.
Yeah,
So we brought that up to Shane. His situation with that, he feels very strongly about that.
emergency access, I
If
guess.
in case for emergency. we can
Someone
get
gets
to the very
shot.
top. Yeah, someone gets shot,
Fire.
above crossfire or fire. Those were the
Okay.
2 things, emergency and fire, so that if we need to, let's not kill them and then made it so we can't protect our own thing that we need.
Okay,
That's, yeah, we wanted to.
okay.
So where does
Well,
flank, how will flank tie back over into, you know, how you can take Corkscrew, then you can go down across and you can pick up flank? If we
You still
lose
will be able to do
Corkscrew,
that.
How will we access, like, say from the tree tunnel, you know where I mean, that we call the
Yeah.
tree tunnel.
Yeah, you still come out. See, we're not killing any of those that go private. And flank goes private right through there.
Developed.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
That's what's gonna stop.
That will be up to you guys.
Yeah,
It'll come to you someday when it wants to be developed,
Hell, yeah.
and we have it on our master plan.
Okay.
And so as long as it's on our master, you can ask for it and hopefully we'll get it and we won't lose some of that. I can tell you right now, the developer feels like it's fine to have corkscrew. He's not happy with flank.
Yeah, and that's kind of
Right,
what I
too.
figured would happen.
Me too, it's right.
And
through the
so-
middle of it.
We would, and I think it's on our master plan, you have to check that. Also, the one on the very bottom has like a 15-footer.
You're right.
The
That-
road.
Right across, right along High Bench.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
that-
yeah.
so we still can keep double access to all areas. So people that want to walk can come down along the High Bench. People that want to ride it can go up and get into it. So that's what we're hoping to maintain. But so, thank you. No more. I can see I got a big turnout of public hearing. Again, sometimes that's disheartening. The way this is the stuff where we should turn.
Right.
You know, but oh. what
We
am I
should get
at?
word out about that, because I have that same person that talked to you, talked to me.
The runner, my
Yeah.
walker friend.
Yeah, I mean, but
Under runner.
it was discussed, you made the same presentation last week at city council,
Yes,
so.
and therefore, and I've got to go again, because that was just a quick, here's what I'm gonna present to you. And then I'm going back tomorrow night, the trail committee will make a recommendation on this to the city council. And then next week we go to city council. We've all talked about it, but we haven't got together and made a recommendation for them. So we're doing that tomorrow night.
So what was the purpose for flattening that out there initially? Was that like, oh, we're gonna do
That's
something?
where the pavilion was gonna be.
That
Okay.
was for a pavilion. So the idea was we wanted to build a structure because there's a rule that you can't shoot a firearm
Yeah.
within
Yeah,
150
You can shoot
feet
at it.
of a structure. So that was the thinking. It
okay.
was a flawed thinking because then we started to see, well, oh, they're setting up their stuff up there and this is gonna be a
Who do we
shaded
think? They were saying.
place
Who
where you
do we
can
think?
load your guns and, you know, take a break. And it didn't
So
work out.
is that
And
gonna be maintained then, that little flat area?
that little flat area,
Bryce actually mentioned he was gonna try to incorporate it into this trail system a little bit to
Okay.
somewhat.
We're gonna tweak some of it, get some of it gone, and we'll use it as a start off to do it, but it won't be quite the size, and it won't be quite so obvious. It's okay.
Okay. Well, I will miss black and white dog because I run on those every morning, but that's okay.
No, that's why I gotta get you guys to walk and, you just gotta get a bike.
I got a bike, but
Well, get on it.
no,
Yeah.
Cosmo won't run with me on my bike.
Oh.
He only runs with me if I run, so.
Well, I know they're gonna be missed.
All right. We'll close the public hearing then. Is there any discussion amongst the planning commissioners?
I just had those questions, so I'm good.
just really quick, planning commission members, make sure that your mics are turned on so you'll see a green light. We record all these meetings and they're broadcast online, so we want to make sure everything's going into the mic.
So I just had one more question while we have Will. So this little white one that's gonna come down Zag and kind of go along that border there, that property line. Can we tell people who are asking, because some people know that these are coming, or that they've heard about this, what should we say? They're just coming? Do we have any kind of
Oh,
a date in mind?
If we approve next week, he's already given us a proposal. He's actually in town. I have him up at Three Falls. He's so good at having him do something up there for me and the Three Falls Trails. In between, because we knew this was gonna take a couple weeks at least, and then we didn't know how it would go, if it would be approved. And so I started him. So yes, he will be starting here at probably the latest in 3 weeks. That's the latest that we start. And he has major trail of Park City's got to start by the middle of June. So he'll be out of here. by
He's
then.
trying to get it done.
So he did, when he moves on, he's here.
That's good.
All right, so we are looking for a motion to recommend for or against trail master plan update be adopted as proposed.
Okay, John, I'll make a motion that we recommend that the trail master plan be updated for Lambert Park. Be adopted as proposed with that map.
Okay, Jeff Davis proposes recommendation. Any seconds?
I'll second that.
Ethan Allen seconds. Any discussion? All in favor? Say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is an amendment to the Alpine City Standard Specifications and Details regarding the Canyon Crest widening.
So I'll take that, and actually, I am going to cover the next 3 agenda items all at the same time, because they all deal with the same project.
Okay.
So, I'm, as you are all aware, because you have read the packet, Alpine City and Highland City are proposing a project to MAG, which is Mountain Land Association of Governments, to widen Canyon Crest Road. And in a nutshell, in order to be able to have this be a viable project to MAG, the city has to update our code to incorporate or include a 5-lane road in our general plan, but even for MAG to even consider the project. So we are doing what MAG needs us to do for this to be a viable project for them. So that's kind of in a nutshell why we're here and what these agenda items are. So the history of this is, as I'm sure you're all aware, you've noticed that during morning and peak hours on Canyon Crest Road, it gets quite congested. I take this route into town every morning, and there have been times during the school year that it is backed up from SR 92 all the way over the hill and to Ridge Drive into Alpine. It gets pretty bad. So this problem has been there for a while, and we've been aware of it for a while. And so a while ago, Alpine and Highland, and actually Lehigh also, we all teamed together and proposed to MAG to do a traffic study for not just Canyon Crest Road, but all of SR 92, clear from I-15 to the mouth of American Fork Canyon. So that was proposed back in 2018. The way their funding cycles work, it wasn't done that same year. But they did start the project, I believe it was in 2020, and it went through 2021. And just recently we have January of 22, we just got the most recent updated traffic study for the area. They're still not done with that study. They're focusing more on roads further west of Alpine at the moment. But they have studied this area, and the result of that study is obviously we need more room for vehicles on Canyon Crest. And so the study resulted in right now that there is 3 lanes, and the study resulted in that we need at least to double that to 5 lanes. And we count, it always seems weird to me that we count the center lane, turn lane as a lane, even though you don't have traffic going up and down it. So I would still call it a 2-lane road, but anyways, currently it's a 3-lane. It is proposed to go to a 5-lane road. A lot of effort. Well, when we first found that out, we then moved on to another consultant to come up with an actual concept plan for the road. And that consultant was Avenue Consultants. When we first started with them, we told them the point of the project, and the point of the project was to obviously move people and traffic. And we said, give us your ideal situation, show us exactly what would be the ideal situation to accomplish this. And they came back with a 96-foot right-of-way cross-section, which I don't believe is the one we're looking at there on the screen, but that's okay.
Okay.
No, that's okay though. Or no, that is the one. So you are on the right one. Yes, that would be the ideal. That would be our wish list. If we had all the room and right of way in the world, this is what we'd like. It has your typical width lanes, has your typical width turn lane. It's got 5-foot bike lanes on the side. It has park strip room, and it also has what they're calling a 10-foot wide multi-use path. I'll talk more about that in a second. anyways, we took that 96-foot right of way, we laid it down on what actually exists there, and we realized pretty quick it wasn't gonna work. We'd end up having to just buy people's property outright. So we went back to the drawing board with them. We said, okay, that looks nice. Let's look at something that can actually work. And I believe that would be,
Figure one.
yeah, it's figure 1, Austin. It's like the second page of the report.
Oh, back, okay.
So we came back with an 83-foot right of way where they dropped the 5-foot bike lanes. They narrowed the park strip and they kept the multi-use path. Now, the multi-use path actually serves kind of 2 purposes. It leaves room for bikes to still travel, bikes and pedestrians to travel the area. So Austin, if you could go, it's actually page 13 in the PDF. This is MAG's active transportation map, and it's kind of zoomed out there. But those purple lines are what currently exists on the MAG's active transportation plan, which active transportation is walking, biking, running. So it consists of things like larger, wider sidewalks or paved trails off the beaten path. And as you can see, there's a big gap in the map there from SR 92 all the way to the roundabout. And so not only are we trying to widen Canyon Crest for traffic, we are also trying to help complete the active transportation plan where there is a gap right there. So that's why the 10-foot multi-use path is staying in the plan. So the project would be a very large project. And so in order for it to be funded with MAG, we had to break it up into phases. And I had that phasing map up, yeah, right there. So the proposal to break it up into phases, phase 1 was what's shown in red, where they would take it from 92 up to Healy Boulevard. Phase 2 is green from Healy to Ridge, and phase 3 would be from Ridge to the roundabout. Phase 1, if it moves forward, just the way the funding cycle works, it's typically a 5-year funding cycle. So say this was approved this year, it would get funded in 5 years. So we're still talking a ways out for construction to actually happen.
So construction will even start for 5 years?
Yes. Yeah, it's still a ways out. It just takes a while for that process to move through the process. But just my own personal thoughts on the way it is phased. Obviously, phase 1 is where the need is the greatest. I feel like if we can get phase 1 done, phases 2 and 3 may not ever happen. I do feel like if phases 2 and 3, if we get the road in and we don't have a traffic problem again, I do feel like we need to push that 10-foot multi-use path and at least complete that part of the phasing in the future. But I do feel like if we get phase 1 done, it will take care of the problem for a while. Earlier you had mentioned, I say you, Jeff, you had talked about, you had asked the ombudsman about eminent domain and potentially having to buy people's property. That is the downfall or the hard point of proposing a project like this. Obviously, this would be impactful to Alpine City residents that live along that corridor. I was looking at, there are more zoomed in versions and we don't have to go look in detail at all of them if we don't want to, but we can. I can't remember what page those are on.
Highlands on the same path
Yes.
of the 5 years?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a joint project. And so both Highland and Alpine kind of put both their names on the same ticket and submit
Okay.
to MAG. So here's some of the more zoomed in versions. This would be part of phase 1. And this is the Allegheny Court, and the purple lines would be the new right-of-way line. And so you can see on the properties there, for example, on the southeast corner, 955 South, the new property line would be very close to a row of trees there. I can't say for sure if they would be taken out at this point, but it is very close. But moving upward, the property straight north of him, the 267 East, they obviously have, I believe it's actually one of those concrete retaining walls. So the retaining wall would be moved, and the site triangle, their fence through the site triangle area would be moved. The property on the west side of the road would most definitely lose some landscaping and trees. But you can see here why a 96-foot wide right of way just wouldn't have worked, period. Whereas this 83-foot one, you're still able to at least keep your setbacks on these homes. So that's the difficult point of proposing a project like this, because it is going to be impactful to residents that own property along the right of way. But overall, for traffic, it's a project that needs to happen. So specifically what MAG needs from us, so they told us that our general plan had to include a 5-lane road on Canyon Crest. Now, our general plan doesn't call out specifically all the details, but it does reference the traffic master transportation plan. That's a lot to say. It obviously mentions our ordinances. Austin, it's pages 163. It's clear out there.
Here we go.
And so there's 3 things that we have to update to appease MAG on this. And one is we need to, and actually before I say that, I should back up. So the idea of appeasing MAG is right now we have 3 roadway classifications in our ordinance. We have just arterial, collector, and local roads. So we came up with the idea of let's split up the arterials. Let's make a major and a minor arterial. The major arterial would have this 83-foot roadway cross section, and the minor arterial would be just what we currently have. We'd leave it at the 66-foot. So Austin's highlighted there how we would change our master transportation map to show that. The next page would be we need a new standard detail that matches the MAG, that would match this roadway. And so this is our standard details showing a new detail with the 83-foot right of way. And then the next page, I believe, is where we need to change the ordinance. So here you can see, and actually, I think go up 1 page, Austin. There's 2 sections here that actually need changed. Okay, stop right here. This is actually a side note. This is just the section of ordinance that needed corrected. So the major street plan, nobody knows what a map of the city of Alpine is. That could be any map. So we needed to specify that this is the most recently adopted Alpine City Transportation Master Plan map. Now go down. So, okay, there's 2 sections here. So in the design section of design guidelines section, the ordinance, we just needed to add a major arterial street having an 83-foot right of way, and the minor is left at 66. And then the next page down just specifies the roadway width. Those are the two sections of ordinance that talk about arterial streets in our ordinance. So those are the three topics or the three agenda items that each have their own public hearing on our agenda for.
So Jed, the 58-foot major arterial width corresponds to the 83-foot width.
Yeah,
with all the
so
other
this one
accessories.
is, yeah, this one's specifically talking about the paved roadway surface width. And so that says roadway width on this section, so typically Alpine City has 30-foot asphalt roads. Well, that corresponds to our minor street or road or frontage roads. And if you go back up a page. Yeah, all of these, you have right-of-way width and then you have roadway width, and each one of them just corresponds with each other. So I hope you didn't fall asleep. I know that's an exciting.
Well, I mean, so really, this
topic.
is the major decision, right? This is where we're changing the code.
Yes, this would
So
be a
this is the
legislative.
legislative
Yep.
decision in this process.
Yeah,
Because once we do this, when they come back and they say they want to do it, then it's just, oh yeah, you've got the code says we have to do this.
yep. And so that's why we specify exactly on the map, the transportation map, where it would be allowed. So if somebody, not like any developer wants to make a road bigger than they normally would.
No.
But let's say they did, we would say, sorry, our transportation master plan map does not have or allow you to put a major arterial in that part of the town. So we're being very specific where it would be allowed and the specifics of it and what it would look like.
And there's a lot of scrolling, hasn't there?
So one quick thing here too is, so on the motion that you're gonna want to, sample motion, the model motion that you're gonna want to use is found in the staff report, which is not the cover sheet, but it's a couple pages in.
Yeah, it's
You'll want to use that to make your motion.
page 5 of the staff report. I'm not sure what page on the PDF.
I'll see it. Let me see if I can pull it up on the screen for you.
Do we have any idea what the population of Alpine, how much it might grow when it's all built out or anything like that? or-
Yeah, so the 2020 census just came out and it showed Alpine's population at
175.
10,430 is our current population. And the estimated build out population is around 14,500.
That's quite a few more people.
Yeah. Yeah, we're about,
That's half again.
yeah, we're about 2/3-ish built out right now. We have another third to go.
It's a lot of pain and suffering for 5 years on that road.
Maybe it can happen sooner. Maybe I spoke wrong, but I know the funding, they talk about the funding being 2025 funding or 2026, so. Yeah, we're 4 or 5 years.
That hits all three of them.
You kind of made a comment that I thought was kind of interesting, like about phase one, because I can totally see phase one. Like in my mind, because I've lived here for 20 years, fairly close to that area, and I'm like, it kind of freaks me out a little bit at phase 2 and 3, a little bit, just, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that again?
Well, I don't want to eat my own words, but maybe I will. I honestly don't think phase 2 and 3 will ever be needed. But maybe in 10 more years, when we get closer to
Maybe.
built out, we might actually
Yeah.
need it.
Just kind of take it as it comes in.
Mhm.
And it's not really an option for us to say we're for phase 1 or we're not for phase 2 or
No.
3.
No.
Really, the only option is to say we're for it or we're not for it,
Yeah.
for the
that's-
most
yeah.
part, because
If we're gonna make the ordinance change to the master plan.
yes, then it has to be pretty much one or the other, because
Yeah.
they're not gonna do it.
Yeah, they're not gonna give us
They
the
won't
money if we
do
just
it if we
say
say
phase
we only
one.
want.
And the funding's all dependent on that too, so it's kind of an
Right.
all or nothing kind of a deal.
I'd be curious to see what Will has.
Should we open up to public comment?
Yes, we'll now open the public hearing.
Just quickly, 2 things on that. Over the years, we've got, one of the things that we used to project was the build out of the 14,000 was 4.3 or 4.6 per resident. One of the things that we found changing is our number per resident is not that high anymore.
It's 3.8.
Pardon?
3.8 is what it is now.
Yeah, so see what's happened to that. So that number of 14 will probably be coming down, okay? It's been interesting, like I said, because I remember
Yeah, we're
when
getting
it was
old.
higher than that.
Yeah,
It was
well,
almost like-
I think originally our projected built out was more in the 15,000 range, and this 14.5 is now reflective of
Is
the
that
3.8.
reflective?
Mhm.
So that's a good thing, and we'll be interested to see how that turns out. The other thing is phase three. The only reason phase three becomes critical is this, let's call it the northeast side of Canyon Crest. If you've driven that at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning,
Afternoon.
Yeah, afternoon, and some of the kids are coming from the junior high. They run out, they don't want to be over here, they're going this way, and so they're on that side of the road. And they're kids, so they can't educate, but there is no sidewalk, there's nothing there, and that is a bad spot. And so 3 not happening, which I don't think it probably ever will either, but I do believe that that's something we as a city need to be looking at and at least get some type of a path or a walkway or something on that one sooner than later.
So I can address that. We actually have been thinking about that. We have already made a property swap deal with Harvey a couple years ago, and for the purpose of it, at a minimum, just getting a sidewalk and path through there.
Excellent.
So-
That's the more, and as that gets crowded, more crowded, and the kids, it's just amazing. I think, I can go over here. There's a sidewalk over there, get over there. They don't do it. And if you got joggers running, they run down that side too. I go, oh my goodness, get over. But they don't love riding sidewalks, so that's where they are.
Mhm.
Good, that's excellent.
Yeah.
That project can kind of get bumped up a little bit and might save a life, so.
Yep.
So-
All right, if there's no other comments, we'll close the public hearing for all 3 of these agenda items. Specifically, the amendments to the Alpine City Standard Specifications and Details, amendment to the Transportation Master Plan map, and ordinance 2022-4 Design Standards and Sub-definitions. Any further discussion amongst the commission?
I'd like to know what you guys think, or if you guys have any comments or like.
Does, I mean, I guess the thought that I kind of have too is like, I mean, I don't know, is it? Like, I'm having a hard time with the whole 4-lane thing all the way through, or, 5-lane thing. Thinking, does that kind of, what does that do to the, I don't know, like, is that Alpine? I don't know, I'm just kind of a little freaked out, you know what I mean, thinking about it, but is that?
A little bit of Alpine.
A little bit of
from
Alpine?
Highland,
Yeah.
Highland city limit to Healy.
Yeah, let's just do it.
It's basically those couple houses.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking, yeah.
There's a couple nice homes that are gonna be affected, but that's where the congestion's the worst.
Yep.
It's a public
I'm worried
safety
it's
issue.
still, I mean, it was so short-sighted when they built Lone Peak back in, what was that night? When did they graduate? That first graduating class, 1998, it's been there that long. And they just built that one level. And Jordan High School has the exact same school, but it's.
2
they
levels.
put the 2 level. And it was just, I don't think there's any kid I can think of that can ever eat in the cafeteria. I mean, it was just underbuilt. So somebody didn't have the foresight to just think about the growth. So now I'm wondering, I mean, I know that's coming down from the, the 14,000.
Mhm.
But it's like, what if we still have, I mean, we're not having to make children, I get it. I mean, I see how the numbers are changing, but I just worry, it's almost like 5 years out that seems like we might get there and go, oh man, we should have done something a little bit different to. Just wonder about if there's more growth coming, even though, you know, we're kind of small here and we only have that small spot from that we need to even pay for, it looks like. All of that, we will still be impacted by everything going into Highland as well from that street. So I don't know, it scared me. 5 years seems like a lot can change, huh?
Yeah, too bad we couldn't, honestly, too bad we couldn't start this 10 years ago.
Mhm.
But we didn't see the congestion 10
Yeah.
years ago to even know.
Right, it
What was
kind
coming.
of appeared out of the use of that road in the school.
Yeah.
No kid rides the bus anymore, so it's awesome.
What's what's the time?
Parking at the high school.
I know,
It's unbelievable.
it's,
Yeah.
Does
it's,
every kid in this world?
you have to have.
Everybody
car.
has a car.
Yeah.
It's just like no one would ride the bus, I mean.
What's
something
the
nobody-
time frame for high bench?
Explain, I don't know what you're talking about.
High bench going to SR 92.
That one's not even being, I mean, it's on the study, but it's not even on the docket.
Okay.
Like I've never had to, like coming into town, right, going north on that road. Has anybody ever had to wait for anybody? I mean, that always.
No, it's
never
just
had-
south.
Just south.
It's only south of the, but it's.
I mean, I'm not.
But it's huge. It's hugely bad.
Oh, yeah,
south.
it's a, I mean, I know, yeah.
So part of the project too, though, is going north at SR 92 and turning left.
Yeah.
There is a
Mm.
problem there, and that, so this project includes those intersection
Making those-
improvements.
That's bigger as well.
Yeah, but you're right, coming into Alpine northward is not as bad. But definitely coming north and turning left on 92 is an issue.
Yeah.
What surprises me is at 4 PM when I'm leaving town, it's congested. And I think, I mean, it makes sense. All the kids get out of school at 3:30, they come home to Alpine, then they turn right back around and go back to school for all
For
the
lunch.
sports.
For their stuff, yeah.
Yeah,
It's true,
so.
in an individual car.
Yes, and so you end up sitting through 2 or 3 light cycles at 4 PM to get out.
Yeah, that's frustrating.
Mhm.
All right, let's bring it back and see if there's a motion we can put forward.
Well, I think I can make a motion. I motion to recommend the approval of the proposed changes to the transportation master plan map, standard specifications and details and ordinances for 4.03.010 and 4.07.040 as proposed.
Okay, we have a motion by Ethan Allen, a second,
I'll second that.
second by Jeff Davis. All in favor?
Right.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
I didn't go, I'm sorry.
Too slow, man.
Yeah, he's not sure.
Oh,
Okay,
It's okay.
yeah, I'm
Still carries.
I'm on board.
okay. We carries by unanimous vote.
Remind us in 5 years.
Yeah, exactly, whatever.
Can we vote for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we voted for that 5 years from now.
Yeah.
When probably just John's gonna be on the planning commission.
Just
at
need a
that
second to
time.
think about it, Joe.
He's like, yeah, when we voted for that, I was,
Yeah.
I'm the only one that was there.
It's a good thing you recorded it.
All right, next item. Yes, we're on the ordinance 2022-3 accessory structures and swimming pools.
All right, I'll go ahead and take this one. So essentially what we're doing here is we're proposing to change the ordinance regarding how setbacks are regulated for accessory buildings and accessory structures. So our current ordinance reads that we have a setback standard for main buildings or dwellings, which would be like a home. And then we have a separate set of setback standards for any accessory buildings or structures. The specific wording that's used in our current ordinance is accessory buildings. However, recently we've been seeing a lot of other types of structures that are being built in the city that are tall and big, People are building waterfalls, diving platforms, all sorts, just weird things that we never would really foresaw. And so we didn't feel like accessory building captured all the different types of structures that are being built in our city and that are being built near property lines and other people's homes. And so we want to just change this to refer to them as customary residential accessory structures. Now that term is an existing definition that we have in our definitions that's in our ordinance. And so we're just using that term that hasn't been used before. And we're just saying all structures, doesn't matter what it is, if it's a barn, it's a garage, it's a diving platform, they all have to meet these setbacks. And so we've just gone through our ordinance, updated all the terminology to essentially change accessory buildings to accessory structures. That being said, there are a few instances where the distinction is important. So there may be instances where it's important to call it an accessory building instead of an accessory structure. So for example, we have an exception clause that allows people to put small sheds, kind of like a tough shed or something, near the property line. And one of the requirements to do that is the accessory building can't have any windows or doors that open on or look onto the neighboring property. And so if you look at item number 7 here on the screen, you'll see we make sure we make that distinction. If the accessory structure is an accessory building, it will not exceed 200 square feet in size. And then there's another part where it talks about the windows and doors. So we're still using accessory buildings, but in a much more limited fashion, just for those specific instances. But in general, everything else we're just going to blanket and call everything an accessory structure. That being said, and then finally, down here at the bottom, you'll see swimming pools. So we felt like swimming pools don't fit in with the rest of accessory structures. They're unique, usually 9 times out of 10, or they're in the ground. There may be above ground ones, but usually they're in the ground. They're not sticking up. They're not blocking any people's views. And so we felt like they should have their own set of setback standards. And so that's what you're seeing here. So the version of this ordinance that was in your packet, I made a few modifications. And so that's why everybody has a hard copy in front of you tonight. That's the latest version of the ordinance. And that's what I'm showing here on the screen tonight. So that's really it. So one last thing to point out, this ordinance change is being proposed in all the zones. So it affects every residential zone. So TR 10,000, the CR 20,000, CR 40,000, CE 5 zones are all going to have this same proposed language change.
So we didn't have any kind of setback requirements on swimming pools before?
We did not. We were just basically it was kind of like it was in the way traditionally how we've interpreted it. We just treated them like a building and they'd follow building setbacks. But someone could argue maybe it's not a building, and why are you making me meet these setback standards? But no one ever really challenged that up until this point. But we're thinking this will make it forward thinking. Ties it up and just make sure
This
there's no
proposal
questions.
essentially proposes what we've been following in practice.
Yeah, it's kind of like, how you have like an oral tradition that you carry down, and this is all the planners have always done it this way. That's kind of like the way it's just always been done. But we're putting it in writing now.
No swimming pools in front yards.
Yeah, to my knowledge, we've never allowed a swimming pool in the front yard.
What's the distance on the rear set?
10 feet.
Most people won't want their swimming pool that close anyways, but
Are you gonna make somebody move one that I'm aware of?
Absolutely.
we'll talk later.
But we're not talking about the flat work, right?
Correct.
No, yeah, so
The actual pool.
this would be measured to the side of the pool, so where the water is. Pool deck wouldn't count in that. Mhm.
So a building is like 5 feet from the side lot?
And then the pool is 10 feet. Is that right?
In the back.
Am I reading that right?
So buildings are 10 and 15, so 10 on the side, 15 in the rear. However, we do have an exception for smaller buildings.
Oh, okay.
Smaller
Yeah.
buildings can get closer. And so that's where you're seeing the
Okay.
5 feet, yeah. So,
So they're a little closer than a regular garage.
Yeah.
They can be 5 feet closer. with a-
yeah, well, so yeah,
Okay.
I mean, in the rear, it would be 5 feet closer than a garage to the
Austin, I
back
have a
property line.
question About easement, so when you have some of the city, you have a city trail and then you have the easement into the person's lot and then their house and stuff. When there's something like that, how close, I mean, a lot of people, I know along the trail where we run, the people have come right up, it feels like they're in the easement or in the city's area. So you know how the city has, to, you
Yeah.
have to have the 30 feet, isn't it 30 feet? 30 feet.
Are we
Well-
talking
From the
setbacks?
trail.
Setbacks or
I'm
easements?
talking about, okay, so the difference of those, let's talk about that real quick. So we have
Yeah.
a house now, there's an easement that used to be, they were gonna do like it was a bridle path. So
Mhm.
everybody's encroached on that, because that just never came to fruition, that just wasn't needed down the road. So that's an easement, right? Because you were giving up some space for something there for.
Yeah, for like a trail
Yeah.
or something,
So
or,
on the city trail, when you have the trail and then you have, when the people have homes up here and the trail runs this way, there's some kind of city property right here. Is that called an easement or is that called a setback? So you have to give up so much of you don't want to encroach on the trail, so you have your lot sits
yeah.
there. and you have the-
so,
So I know that.
I
how
mean,
do you
setbacks are
enforce
measured
that?
from the property line. So wherever the property line, that's where we're gonna measure from. So there may be a trail easement that runs right up against the property line.
Mhm.
It may be off the property line. And so we're not necessarily looking at where is the trail or whatever that
Yeah.
is.
But I'm just saying, people
Yeah.
can't put their pool back in there with the city property. Do you know what I'm
On
talking
city
about?
property, they cannot
Is it-
encroach on city property.
Okay,
Yeah, so
so
that would be
you're
considered like an
taking it from-
encroachment. If we had open space, which actually has happened,
Yeah.
and there are
Yeah,
instances
that's
of that
how-
around town.
That happens.
People
Mhm.
begin to think
They think that's theirs.
that's their backyard.
Yeah.
And so they start to build fire
Mhm.
pits and swimming pools and,
Yeah.
yeah, you'd be surprised the different types of encroachments we've seen.
Chicken coop.
Right, a
Lots of
chicken
chicken
coop, yeah, so that's a kind of a separate issue, but there, when you bring up the easements, that's a good point. So the 10-foot there are rare instances where we may have like a sewer easement that's 20 feet, but most easements are gonna be inside that 10-foot area.
Okay.
So most easements are either 10 or 5 feet,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and so they're gonna be inside that setback, so we don't have to worry about it.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yep.
All right, let's open the public hearing for ordinance 2022-3, accessory structures and swimming pools. Anybody wish to comment? Will?
I'd only comment that I'm all in favor of this. We're dealing with this one a lot.
Okay.
So thank you for getting this clarified. It's a big deal. It's surprising how often people bump up against this stuff. All the
Yeah.
time. These guys have to deal with it constantly, but it's a thank you.
People just think it's
The big
theirs.
ones.
Cool. All right, we'll close the public comment. Any discussion? Ready for a motion?
I'll make a motion. I move to recommend that ordinance 2022-03 be adopted as proposed.
I'll second it.
Okay, recommendation by Troy Stout.
Well,
I got the mayor on my mind
He's
here.
promoting.
yeah.
There you go. Next man.
That's
right.
Cheat sheet. Susan Whitmer. Seconded by Susan Wittenberg. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, our final item tonight is ordinance 2022-5, accessory dwelling unit requirements.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take this one. So earlier tonight, we had the state ombudsman here, and he talked about this a little bit about ADUs, accessory dwelling units. And so we have, our ordinance, we were kind of ahead of the curve because we allowed accessory dwelling units in all homes in the city. And so we thought we were good, but we overlooked something. So there's a spot in our ordinance where it says you can only have, if the accessory dwelling unit is on the main floor, it can only be up to 25% of the main floor square footage. And so we're basically just crossing that out to be in compliance with the state legislation that passed last year. So we're no longer able to limit the size of an ADU. And so we're basically just crossing out that language. That's what you're seeing here. So you can see on your screen the 25%. And then we also say, we crossed out here where it contains no less than 300 square feet of living area. So those two things are being eliminated. And again, that's really just to bring us into compliance with the state requirements.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool. Have we had a problem or a question of that?
We have had, and this actually happened before the legislature passed this bill, but about 2 years ago, we had a guy that wanted to build an accessory dwelling unit on the main floor, and he was in a for Alpine, it was a really small home. And so even just doing a few 100 square foot addition onto his home, he was exceeding the 25%. And he's like, I have a neighbor that has, his whole basement is an accessory apartment and it's 2,000 square feet. And you're telling me I can't have a 500 square foot ADU on here for my mother-in-law? And so it was, that we butted heads on that issue. And so if he would have come, if that same issue had come through now, that wouldn't be an issue. But at the time, that was the ordinance.
Okay.
We'll open a public hearing on ordinance 2022-5, accessory dwelling unit requirements. Anybody wishing to speak to this, come to the podium.
The pulpit.
Nobody here. We will close the public hearing. And any discussion amongst the planning commission? None. Looking for a motion then.
I'll make a motion. I move to recommend the ordinance 2022-05 be adopted as proposed.
Recommendation proposed by Ethan Allen, seconded by.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Jeff Davis. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, any communications?
I don't have any communications from staff tonight. I don't think so.
Okay. Anybody review the minutes, wishing to make a motion to approve?
Yeah, I did read through. There's a little ticky-tacky thing. But on the second to the last page, on the eyes, I was not included in that motion. There was only 4 and it says 5 eyes. So I just need to add my name on the bottom of page 3.
Marla, did you get that? I think she's online, but
Yes, that was the bottom of page 3, and it was for which
Jeff.
motion?
For Jeff Davis, the motion of approving the minutes for the November 16th and January 4th meeting.
Okay, thank you.
That was the only thing that I noticed.
Ready for a motion?
Yeah, you're actually on the next page. If you go
Yeah,
down.
for the, I
You're on
take
the
it back.
next
Oh, I
page.
see. Okay,
Yeah.
never mind.
So you're there.
Oh, I am at number 1.
Yeah, it's just.
I did not notice that.
It's just
Okay.
where the page break fell.
it's interesting.
Okay.
It it goes over to the next page.
Okay, good call. Good catch, Ethan.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the January 18th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting.
I'll second that.
A motion by Troy Slade. Seconded by Ethan Allen. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Motion to adjourn will be entertained.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Yep, motion to adjourn by Ethan Allen, seconded by Susan's. Wittenberg. All right.
We'll get it.
Meeting adjourned.